Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Brandon Moss, and I'm the president of the Ohio Choral Directors Association. Thank you for being with us here this evening for our third and final New Directions webinar of 2020, as we begin to unpack this very important topic of anti-racist practice and decolonization of choirs. Our two facilitators, Kelsey Burkett and Mario Clopton-Zymler, come with a lot of expertise in this area, and they have prepared an informative and frank presentation for us that includes conversations geared around the questions that several of you sent ahead of time with your registrations. And I know that they will also have time for questions at the end. Before we begin, I have a few short housekeeping items. For the out of courtesy to our presenters, if you could make sure that you stay muted throughout the evening unless we're asking questions at the end. Also, tonight's session is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel and website. So if you know of anybody who missed this webinar, you'll be able to point them in that direction, and I hope you do. Also, at the end of the session, I will provide a link for you to an evaluation, which will help. It's not an evaluation of Kelsey and Mario, it's an evaluation that will help OCDA as we plan future professional development for you, our members. Finally, if you wish to receive professional credit for your attendance here tonight, there is a spot on the evaluation where you can request this. Kelsey Burkett is Director of Choirs at Hilliard Memorial Middle School. Now in her 15th year of teaching, she holds both bachelor's and master's degrees from Capital University. And earlier this year, she was one of 10 national recipients of the Country Music Foundation's previous Music Teacher of Excellence Award. Mario Clopton-Zymler is Director of Choirs at Shaker Heights High School. He currently serves as the co-chair of the OMEA Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Access Committee, tasked with the mission of advancing racial equity and anti-racism policies and practices within OMEA. He holds degrees from Capital University, California State University, Los Angeles, and is currently a doctoral student in educational leadership at Ohio University. Please help me welcome our presenters tonight.
Ah, the silent applause of Zoom. So lovely. Well, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. So glad you're here. Oh, I see your little clap emojis. Thank you. I gotta share this with y'all first. So Mario and I go way back, about what, 21, 22 years.
Yes.
Back. He was baby Mario to me for many years. But I thought I would share this with you all because I think you'll just really enjoy it. And it is Kelsey and Mario circa 2002 at Solon High School's Music in Motion. So there it is in those glorious show choir days.
Oh boy.
Yeah. How do you feel about that, Mario?
I feel great. That was, what a time. You know, like show choir freshman year with Dave Curtis. You know, you couldn't have asked for a better, honestly.
Yeah. No, we had a really great music experience growing up, but I think I can speak kind of for both of us that we also are used to being the brown faces and white spaces. And I know for me, and Mario, you could speak to yourself, that's very much shaped my outlook and my experience, you know, not just as a choral musician, but as a human being. And so we'll get into more of that. Mario, do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. I remember one of the conversations Kelsey and I having when we first got to Capitol was about being one of the only chips in the cookie, smooth transitions. And there was a pre-orientation program geared towards students of color to prepare them for the reality of entering into college as an academic, but also in a space where your perceived or your identity was different than the majority. And us growing up in Solon definitely has shaped our experience. And the thing that I learned as now I'm looking back as a 33-year-old man is that every Black experience is different. As a qualitative researcher, I suppose, I validate the lived experience as just as authentic and as important and valid as any numbers can teach. And you can look to Kelsey's story, you can look to mine as well for a wealth of knowledge, recognizing they are in and of themselves experiences and not necessarily indicative of everybody's experience as a Black person, but to take our experiences for what they are, which are experts in our understanding of our experience.
So we will get into the nitty gritty here. So I want everyone to keep in mind, we are unraveling hundreds of years of systemic oppression and mindset. I truly feel just even in this last year, conversations are really starting to be had and look at, particularly in the education world and the music educational world, what are the systemic issues that are plaguing us as a profession and how do we start to overcome that? So this is daunting work. This is exhausting work. It's not going to be finished in just one conversation. And so the fact that you guys have all signed up for this and are here tonight says that you are ready to start having those conversations and doing that work. Keep an open mind with us. You know, we're going to be throwing some things at you that, you know, may trigger something within you, may make you feel defensive, may make you feel fragile. That is all good, because if you are uncomfortable, that means you're thinking about it. Nothing ever worth doing was comfortable. And I think we know that as educators in 2020, right? So that's so important. With this subject, it is so easy to go off into 20,000 different tangents on just one little thing. So Maria and I are going to try and keep this pacing. There were 4 really incredible questions that were sent to us that we're going to answer for you guys. And as we go on, a question may pop up in your mind and we may answer it and we may not. So if you can just throw your questions in the chat, and then we will try to have some time at the end. I'm happy to stay on and talk to y'all more after this hour if you want to. My kid's in bed, so woo, party time for me. So yeah, so let's just get into this and go for it. Take it away, Mario.
Thank you. So racism is, I read once, racism is so normal that it is typically invisible to those who benefit from it daily. It's a system of advantage and oppression based on race. It is a power structure. It is social, and as it exists in the world, it tends to exist as a white supremacy system, and also tangential to those systems, so in organizations, society, and structures as well. The equity versus equality definitions and conversations, it's one thing that's ongoing all the time. Practitioners of social justice and of equity work are always finding ways to fine tune what equity is and isn't, and what equality is and isn't. Starting with what inequity is, being an unfair distribution of material and non-material access and opportunities that result in outcomes and experiences that are desperate to specific groups, predicted by race, socioeconomic status, gender identity, home language, or other dimensions of identity. Equality, as it exists in definitions, basically an egalitarian distribution of rights or treatment or understanding, and the word equality has evolved, whereas some of the elements of equality exist in an equity framework. As an education administration major or a focus as my dissertation work, it's clear that equity focuses in on resources and on the distribution of resources, and systems and structures, and how they partake in the distribution of those resources that really speak specifically to equity. So then in equity, a commitment to action, the process of redistributing access and opportunity to be fair and just. I also appreciate that second definition, the way of being, the state of being free of bias, discrimination, and identity, predictable outcomes and experiences.
So I think all of those definitions can be daunting to wrap our minds around, especially when it comes to the term of equity, because, you know, you may look at that and think, well, how can we ever get to that point? I don't know if we can. Can we strive to get there? Absolutely. So in thinking about those three definitions, how do these look in the choral music world? So when we look at inequity, and this is access, this is all sorts of things, we're looking at gender-based ensembles, particularly for our students who are non-binary trans. If you've got an ensemble that is women's choir or men's choir, that's gonna not be receptive to them because they're not gonna find a place where they fit in there. There is a big debate right now. I know I've seen many conversations about multicultural music. We'll get more into this later on because I know this is a hot topic. But the music, programming of multicultural music or ethnic music or cultural music, but there's no cultural value to it, or it doesn't have a specific educational purpose for the students. And you really have to think about that too when you think about your singers who identify with those pieces that you're programming and getting into doing those pieces and completely traumatizing and offending students if you're not properly prepared to present those pieces. Our Western-based, Eurocentric conservatory and undergraduate music programs. I am a product of one of the best ones. I know Mario is too. We are not sad about that. But we have to think about kids that are not like Mario and I, who came from really wealthy, really Eurocentric based high school programs. You know, we walked in prepared for that. What about our students who are not prepared for that? When we look at the way our conferences present themselves and we pick auditioned choirs and ensembles, are we really, is that blind audition process really giving us the greatest scope of what we can access of our music making? At the same time, do we want to bring in the urban strings program or the rural, you know, ensemble as a tokenized ensemble just to say, hey, we hit our diversity mark, we got these groups in here? Also, just the honor choir audition process says a lot of students don't have access to teachers that can take them through the audition process, get them prepared, get them recorded, sending the recording process in. So there's a whole sect of students out there and singers out there that we're not able to access simply because they don't have the tools to do that. When we go into equality for our music programs, there are things that we are doing that are great, that are giving access to students. Equal access to fundraising for long trips, time slots for musicians or for auditions, offering a variety. So for singers who maybe have to work multiple jobs or they don't have parents that can bring them at early morning times or late at night times, having a wide range for those things. Rubric and standards-based grading that's not just based on showing up to a concert. I know y'all, I teach in public school, we know how important those concerts are, but there are so many kids that come from BIPOC families. By the way, so sorry, BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. You'll be hearing us throw around that term a lot. It's become very popular in the discussion of diversity, but in case you haven't heard it, that's what it means. But, you know, sometimes those students can't get back to school at 7 o'clock for a concert. So we need to consider our grading procedures. Is the concert the biggest grade for our ensemble, or can we do more? Voice and choice when it comes to performance clothing is, and don't get me wrong, I love a beautiful dress and a gown and a tux, but is that really the most accessible way to outfit our ensembles anymore? Especially with so many students starting to identify in non-binary ways. When we want to go towards the equity side of choral music, we're looking at gender-neutral performance clothing. Clothing that's adaptable to our singers who want to be modest, whether you have students of the Muslim faith or other faiths that need to cover themselves. A short sleeve dress may not be the thing that they're most comfortable in. Is your uniform adaptable to a hijab or something that's more important for them to wear to honor their own modesty? Authentic programming, which we'll talk about later. More voice-based ensembles. I used to have men's and women's ensembles, and as more and more non-binary and trans students came through, I realized that those were not the right thing. And so we switched to voice-based ensembles. It's been such a huge difference for us in making our students feel welcome and like they had a place in our choral program. Start reevaluating how we allow students into our undergraduate programs. Do we need to hear them sing something from the 24 Italian arias to know that they're going to be successful in our undergraduate program? What do we really want students to be able to come into our undergraduate programs to do, to be successful musicians and music educators? And then the recruitment of BIPOC students and staff. Representation is so important for people to see. If I see someone that looks like me, I know that there's a place for me in that world. And like I said, these are not things that are going to be fixed overnight, but it should be things that are on our radar to get to this level of equity within our choral programs. So we're going to break down a couple different types of racism and then how they relate into the choral arts. So the first type of racism we're going to look at is socio-historical racism. And I think the term racism is tricky for people because what I have seen a lot is when people hear the term racism or racist or thinking like that, they're thinking Ku Klux Klan and hate and cross burnings and lynchings and these acts of violence. And yes, racism is those things, but racism is a whole systemic issue that has been a part of our country from the beginning. So when we look at the socio-historical racism, it's looking at the way we're socialized to make the meaning and understanding of race and understanding that certain races are inferior to others. And it's something that becomes deeply embedded in our psyches and normalized, so much so that it becomes the truth for many different people. So in choral music, and again, these are just things that are out there. I know this may seem shocking to some of us, but these are some of the thoughts of racism that are in our choral music community. Black singers can only sing jazz or gospel, spirituals, or they don't blend in a choral setting. Cultural music used as a wow piece or the closer piece to show off your choir, but did you really go that next step, that further step in teaching the significance of the piece? The idea that BIPOC students wouldn't have an interest in classical music. I think we've seen through social media the incredible Kawante family from England, the one son that played the cello at the royal wedding a few years ago. That is clearly not true, but these are things that are out there in, you know, that have become normalized that we have to move past.
So the result of socio-historical racism becomes ideological racism, which informs worldviews and belief systems and individual belief systems. Ideological racism also can be a choice. People can adopt a white supremacist ideology, even if they don't necessarily believe in inherent white supremacy. And that is not just inherent to people who identify as white. You don't have to be, you can be a person of color and adopt inherently white supremacist ideals. So in choral music, we're talking about gospel singers and the litmus test of who, whether they are or are not musicians, not identifying or recognizing gospel music or music that doesn't necessarily require sheet music or reading of music as high enough of a standard. Teaching of minstrel songs and other songs with racist histories at the elementary level. They're in the canon of music, of the 2,000 plus music that exists in Western music alone. There are plenty of songs we can teach to our young ones that can properly teach things that we're trying to teach, which is rhythm, technique, and expression, and tone quality that don't necessarily have to have racist tropes attached to them. It just requires us to think outside of what we are maybe used to hearing, or maybe what we heard as emerging singers and musicians. A lot of us revert back to what we were raised with, or what we came up with that we liked, that inspired us, or that got us interested in music. But to be cautious about where that comes from, because again, society changes and our pedagogy and our curriculums should change as well. Appropriation of cultural dress or dances in order to enhance a performance. I would also add to that different ethnic sounds, perhaps. Like it's a balancing act. But if we're doing it in an inauthentic way, or even if we are doing it, it does again. It's a fine line that we'll talk about a little bit later about appropriateness versus appreciation versus appropriation. And then certain cultures and music becoming irrelevant or too complicated to teach the singers. Again, that kind of tag teams with the teaching of minstrel songs. It's something that people fall back to if something's too difficult or something's too challenging. We push it to the side instead of embracing or doing the research or trying to drill down to find, you know, the benefits and the good parts that could benefit our students. And individual racism becomes a result of ideological racism informing interpersonal interactions. One person takes a racist action against another person. It's not a question of intention, but a question of impact. I can speak from my own experience, understanding that I have in my practices as a choral conductor promoted white supremacy in song selections. I have. And it's a matter of fact, and when you acknowledge it, you can move through the process of figuring out how to make yourself better. Again, my intention has never been to do so, but I have done that, and so it's just something I have to recognize. Specifically in choral music, the tokenizing of Black singers. This gets touchy because, again, you have a student, you live in a predominantly white community, and you want to do Rent, and you got to have a Collins, and you feel like you got to have that Black Collins that can really go for it. And I'll use myself, and Mario comes along, and he's a great singer, and he's a solid guy. He's going to show up to your rehearsals. His grandmother gets him to rehearsal on time most of the time. And you realize that, wait, Mario doesn't actually do that type of music. Like, please don't give me any gospel. I'm not going to do it well. That's not how I was taught in undergrad, and it's just not my oeuvre. But that's an example. Asking singers to sing like a certain group of people when performing multicultural music, cultural costumes, movement, dialects, and other manipulation of ethnic music, and continued mispronunciation of singers' names. I'll also add, just in general, your students' names. Each of our students are unique, and they were independently and beautifully named by their parents, and we should at least do our best to honor their existence by working very hard to get their names right.
Yeah, and just in touching even with Mario's experience, I experienced something very similar to him. When we have singers walk into our ensembles, it's important not to make snap judgments of what their musical ability is based on how they look. And again, I know I'm talking to a bunch of intelligent people that would say, well, that's ridiculous, Kelsey. Why would anyone do that? It happens. And, for me, I once experienced this in my time in undergraduate. We would sing, and I was one of a few students of color in my ensemble, and we had another student of color that was oftentimes a soloist, and she was African American. But then people would see me and they're like, oh my gosh, that was the soloist. And I want to be like, no, it was the other Black girl. Thank you. And, again, it's funny, but it's also kind of one of those microaggressions that happens over and over again, to the point where I just want to be like, I'm more than just what you thought I was. And my contribution to the ensemble was different. So just little things that happen that we just need to be aware of.
And then, sorry, is this one of mine?
That's yours, Mario.
Okay, sorry. Institutional racism, the implications of ideological racism operating in an institution can be enacted through policies, practices. They can be unspoken aspects of institutional culture that target or harm people of color while being advantageous to white people. In choral music, some examples of how this exists is in, we saw this past summer, the Great Awakening, as has been named, but in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and all of the countless people whose names we continue to to lift up. Seeing organizations with good intention presenting diversity statements about the murder of people. And it's okay for organizations to renew their commitments to diversity. But for me, acknowledge the issue, which is the murder of innocent people, innocent Black people, by power structures, by government. So I was personally involved in a couple of those, and I sit on several boards that I was really actually asking and pleading for people to not do statements without anything to back it up. And it was organizations that felt like if they didn't say anything, then they would be accused of being racist. And my answer would be, if you haven't done the work until then you should be accused of being racist. Like, you can't just shy away from the consequences because you realize that you made a mistake, or you realize you haven't been up to par in terms of, promoting your diversity and your inclusion and actually living it. Also, in the hiring, retention, appointment, and recruiting practices of our organizations, I know for certain, I'm just going to call it out, OMEA is probably going to be looking for an executive director sometime soon. And I am hoping that that search is not going to be a whole bunch of band directors in Massillon coming together and picking among them who is going to replace that executive director. And that's just one example. As I say, again, I'm part of the DEIA of that committee, that's Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Anti-Racism and Access Committee. So that's first on my mind, but I'm thinking that, and that's for all these organizations. Music can be a very boys club type of working. It could be very white people led unintentionally, and really giving it a go to make sure that you are getting a diverse field of candidates. There is, I say it all the time, there's no reason why every cabinet secretary for the rest of time can't be a Black person or a person of color, because in every field there is a qualified person, a qualified Black woman specifically, who can do every job ever. And if you don't make the intention to look for those people, then you're going to end up with the same results. Uniform requirements, appearances, we've touched on it. Again, those can be something that is a part of policy that's embedded in tradition. I've seen a lot of lack of advancement for the sake of tradition in some choral programs, including my own that I've been working to transition out of. I think by this point, my program is pretty Cloptized, as I say. But even so, for the sake of tradition, for keeping up things, we might promote institutional racism. Curriculum requiring mastery of Eurocentric music and specifically post-secondary music studies. Kelsey hit on it earlier. What is it that we're trying to teach our future musicians about the study of music? And is the repertoire that we've been given for 100 years or so in the modern conservatories the appropriate music for everything? Just taking into consideration things that have been and questioning whether we're promoting it because it's good practice or if it's just what we've done is always a good thing to do just when you're running an organization. Lack of BIPOC mentorship, connections with BIPOC students in undergraduate and graduate music programs. I am working right now with an awesome student teacher who is going to do great things. He's a young person of color, keyboardist. He's going to be an all-star. And I'm so happy and that he made it through the university system, is going to be able to affect music education to come. I wish that there were more pipelines for young budding music educators to not just get into the collegiate programs, but to get out of them and then to stay in the career path. So a lot of that happens with mentorship. So that's why you're never going to not see me with a student teacher and working to make those connections for them. That's how I try to honor that pipeline. And I hope I can continue doing that in the future.
So I hesitated in putting these slides up because I don't know. We live in this really crazy world of social media, and so many people want to be keyboard warriors and, you know, fight from behind their cell phones. But I really took a time to look at these websites, and personally, I'm very touched by these Instagram pages because, as Mario said, during the Awakening this summer, multiple Instagram sites popped up for school districts around Columbus, one being Hilliard City Schools, where I am. And the experiences these kids were sharing on this Instagram page were heartbreaking. One of them was about one of my choir concerts. And it was devastating for me because I have prided myself on being woke, on being so accepting for all. And I realized that I had done harm at one of my choir concerts, and it was hard to see that out there. And so I wanted to share these with you guys just because I think there is strength and power in hearing people's stories. If you are on the Instagram world, there are several of these out there. This is at choir is racist. There's also an at orchestra is racist, at band is racist. There's also a really good one called Overheard While Black. There's just power in hearing people's stories. So I just wanted to point a couple of these out to you guys. And some of these are intentional, some of these are unintentional, but these are just things we need to be aware of as educators and as conductors for the individuals that are in our group. And so like this one kind of talks about some dialect issues. This was in my middle school choir, but I'll never forget the blatant racism. Our last concert of the year was filled with different spirituals, mainly ones relating to Christianity. One song we had was a Caribbean spiritual, Child Shut the Door by Randy Stonehill. Almost every person in the choir room was uncomfortable when singing this piece, and it was more than obvious that the lyrics were written to mock Caribbean accents. We brought this up with our white male assistant choir director, who said, "It's not racist because that's how people from down there sound." So just a lot, you know, we'll talk a little bit more about looking at pieces and whether or not they're authentic like that. Obviously, these singers brought this up to their choir director and it wasn't listened to. So that's just a huge ouch that was done to those. I think this is an important one too, because I think sometimes we get excited when we have students in our ensembles that maybe could identify or help us with our language or anything like that. But again, that's just a moment of tread lightly. And make sure that student is comfortable before you single them out. I am usually one of the few Jewish kids in my choirs. I have noticed that whenever we do a song in Hebrew, my directors would always look at me for pronunciation or explanation. They have had me stand in front of the class and explain Hanukkah and Rosh Hashanah. And when she would explain a burning about biblical songs, they look at me and say, "We don't need to have the same beliefs, but try to understand the song. It's annoying and I'm sick of it." We'll send this out too, just for time purposes. I won't read all of them to you. This one in our grade 8 French immersion class was putting on an art show, and one of the songs our teachers had picked was called Femme de Couleur by, and I apologize, I think it's Chaim, a woman of color. Our teachers chose a white girl to sing it. My classmates said that I should sing it because I'm a woman of color and sang in a choir outside of school, and the other girl didn't. Another classmate said that my 2 friends and I should dance in the background. We were the only 3 women of color in the class. Instead of our teachers listening to our critiques, they just replaced the song and never addressed their choice or our classmates' racist comment. So clearly this student was traumatized on multiple levels, A, from not being asked to do something as a singer of color and as a woman of color, then even on the other level, ignoring the whole issue at hand, not giving a chance, you know, to address this. It was a huge teaching moment that conductor missed. This one I see it happen a lot. It happens in my district. It happens a lot of places. And I just think we need to be aware of this, especially if we're marketing our ensembles in a public way. I was a paid intern for a 100+ voice choir. I was the only person of color in the choir. For every performance, I was placed front and center. I was always given the ethnic solos. In my last year, I was asked to be a part of their Kickstarter campaign. I thought they asked a variety of people. When I saw the Kickstarter video, I saw that I was the face of the campaign, me, the one person of color. And that goes back to tokenizing our singers of color, or, you know, using if we do have a predominantly white ensemble, you know, singling out those persons of color. They're not there to be publicity heads for you. They're there to be members of ensembles. And I find sometimes this practice to be dehumanizing to singers of color that are in ensembles. So like I said, this page is full of these stories. Some of them will kind of make you laugh uncomfortably. Some of them will break your heart. But I'm glad these stories are out there, because people need to be able to share these traumas that have happened to them. And we need to learn from them so that in future moments, we don't find ourselves making these same mistakes. And there's just a few more there you can glance over. This one killed me. In a national choir for university-age singers, a soprano from a more populated region state claimed that the only singer representing a particularly less populated region state was chosen based on a pity acceptance. I mean, that's just downright ignorance and not nice. So we're going to get into the question part of the program. We've got 4 great questions here. And Mario, were you taking this one, or is this me? Sorry.
I'll take this one since you're doing the next one.
Yes,
to give you a break.
Yes.
So I'll try to paraphrase this question. No, I'll just go ahead and read it. I am a Caucasian teacher in a primarily Caucasian district. I want to respectfully expose my students to music of the classical masters, as well as music from other cultures and composers of color. However, I feel things have become so contentious that I find it hard to even ask questions around the topic. I have tried to clarify the points of views of people using various online forums, groups of music educators, for example, only to be accused of wanting people of color to carry my workload and do my research for me. They're suggesting just Google it, but I'm sorry, that is not a scholarly way of addressing a problem. As we all know, anything can be put online by anyone at any time. So to me, asking someone to share their experience is a better route to understanding the issues at hand. Is this truly such a bad approach? This is, first off, you are not alone in your journey to finding and to seeking knowledge. I'm recalling a piece that we did in college called Spirit Seeking Light and Beauty, Heart That Longeth for Thy Rest. We, you know, us capital folks, but we're always, especially if you are intending on something good, it is frustrating when you feel like you can't get the answers that you're looking for. I would start with a couple of things. Just no harm, no foul. Caucasian is outdated and it's over. We don't use it anymore. It doesn't represent anything. White is a racial construct created by white people, and it's an identifier. There are ethnicities that can be associated, but Caucasian is lingo that we no longer really use anymore. So just take that for what it's worth. And again, I understand how frustrating it is. I think what people are trying to say when you should just Google it, the internet can be a very terse and short place that you can't really communicate well. There are Black people or people of color who are exhausted having these conversations. There are some of us who have committed to this work as a part of their profession. There are people who commit to it as just, within your friend circle. But again, the assumption that every person of color has an opinion that they want to share in and of itself is problematic. And so recognize that for what it is. And I guess I would say for me, what I'm looking for, if I'm having these conversations in an unofficial way, I'm looking for you having done some research, right? So when I've read this question, I did a quick Google search, and I think I titled it Black Scholars on Anti-Racism. And from that Google search, I got a couple of consistent names that popped up in literature that if I were to go to, if I'm a white person going to a Black person, I would say, are you comfortable having this conversation? Okay, cool. Ta-Nehisi Coates says this. This is what I've experienced. What do you think? That way it's not like, I don't understand why I can't say X. Explain it to me. For me, I now know that you have coded yourself as someone who has done some work, so that it's not just incumbent upon me to do everything in the conversation. So for me, I'm just saying, when you're having those conversations, maybe address it in that way. Like if you're looking for a way to get questions answered without appearing to have require the person to answer everything for you. And again, the Black experience, people of color's experience are not monolithic. I grew up in a predominantly white suburban district where I went to more bar mitzvahs than baptisms, right? And that's a part of my lived experience as a Black person. That doesn't mean I didn't experience racism, I didn't experience microaggressions, I experienced all of those. But I also have a foundation in Blackness that is not everybody's experience. And so even if you're getting that personal approach, it isn't monolithic. So I don't know if there's necessarily an answer to all of these, but I would just say those couple of points. Come with some knowledge and understanding. Try to do some research, and if you're wrong, be okay with being corrected.
Yeah, I think Mario touched on everything, and the other thing I would say to you is realize we have not been trained as human beings to talk about race in a productive and reconciliatory way. And so to err is human. We are going to make mistakes. I'm going to make mistakes. Mario's going to make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes in having these conversations, but be willing to have a conversation and go into the conversation somewhat educated. And then after you're done with the conversation, educate yourself some more. Don't let that be your stopping point. We'll skip back to this one because I want to make sure we get to this. Okay, here we go. Are work songs such as Pick a Bale of Cotton still acceptable to teach and sing? What about songs that originate from Stephen Foster, such as the arrangement of Camptown Races, because of his minstrel background and that some of his song lyrics reflect racial prejudice? The answer is no. This is no longer okay. Here is why. There's a couple things. First of all, this is a great resource. I'm going to open it up here so you guys can see it. And I'll tell you why it's a great resource. So up at the top here, there's going to be a bunch of amazing articles, podcasts, things like that for you to read. Reasons why minstrel songs don't no longer belong in the class. Origins of Jim Crow. If you don't know the Jim Crow laws, these were laws that were in the South in the United States. Quite frankly, up until 1964, which is not that long ago, that made Black people live as second-class citizens. Kelsey is the creator of this database. She has done incredible work. The other thing I like about this database is if you scroll over, it gives you supporting evidence of why these songs are okay. So the question was about Pick a Bale of Cotton. So if you look through this resource, it goes back and it tells you what the story of Pick a Bale of Cotton was. So it talks about it was a Negro work song prior to slavery. So we know Negro work song means it was a song for the enslaved people. If you look at the words and things like that, it talks about what was happening in them. This resource is American Ballads and Folk Songs. Let me see if I can open up the page here. It goes into a lot. You see the word use of the N-word in a lot of these old songs. John Henry, you guys have probably heard about him. My kids loved this old hammer. It's not one we're going to do anymore. But it's really important to research these songs. And this database is great. Another thing I learned recently, Jingle Bells, our beloved Jingle Bells, has history related to minstrel songs and minstrel performances. Don't get me wrong, these are classic American songs. You probably may have an emotional connection to them. I know I have an emotional connection to Aaron Copland's Chingering Chaw arrangement. Oh Susanna, Old Dan Tucker I did with our tenor bass player about 5 years ago. But if you don't know the story of Old Dan Tucker was a caricature of the 1800s Negro man, and it was considered that he was highly sexualized and was a drunkard and would come into towns and you know, go after the white women in the towns. It's just not things we should do anymore. Now, I will tell you, oops, sorry, didn't need to bring that up. Let me go back to the slideshow. So there's a couple things I want you to think about when we're programming, wanting to teach kids these songs, okay? So you need to look at them is what's the intention behind the song? If you're looking up the history of the song, can you teach it without making the child sing it and chant it over and over again? Is it important that they are aware of these songs? I believe so, absolutely. What we need to realize that a lot of time for our students of color, when they come into our classrooms, particularly the young ones, they may have already experienced trauma and racism, even at a very young age, and may even have more knowledge and experience of it than we do in approaching that song. These songs have been cleaned up over time. They're an erasure of painful and violent histories. There's 3 reasons why we teach them. They're great songs. We love them. We're emotionally connected to them. They're the songs we've been taught as kids. They're just a part of that American tradition and should be taught. Yeah. So like, for instance, the song Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo, catch a tiger by its toe. The original term was not tiger. It was the N-word. And this was a song that was used to pick who would be lynched at night. Not a song we should be using to teach children how to count. But then I look at the other way. I look at the song, the canoe song. My paddle's keen and bright. Love that song. It's great for teaching tea-ta-tea to students. Is it a Native American song? No. Is it creating an atmosphere? Yes. So I would present it to my students and saying, here's this really cool song. It's in minor. It's creating an atmosphere. It's talking about us canoeing. But I wouldn't approach it and say, oh, this is a Native American song. When you are looking at songs, if you've got to know the history of your songs. And if the song has an openly derogatory or racist history, I wouldn't touch it. The other issue with the minstrel songs, if you just don't know the history there, with minstrel songs, they're the objectification of Black bodies. They were very performative of violence during this area with carnivals and public lynchings. And it just led white audience to believe that Blacks were meant to be abused and that their bodies were immune to pain, which is still a systemic issue we have today when we look at the policing and treatment of Black people in our society. Another song that's controversial, I've been working on the railroad, was based on the Levee song that was published in 1894. It's again the caricature of Black laborers. A lot of people say like, but this history was so long ago. It really wasn't. In fact, my dad went to the very first desegregated elementary school in Tennessee. He's 65 years old. So this was not that long ago. And these are histories we have to get out of. And I see the chat is blowing up and I have no idea what's going on in the chat. So we will get to your questions though here in just a second. Mario, do you want to take this one?
Sure, yes. While I don't necessarily think it is the responsibility of the Black community to have to educate others, I'm so grateful for this knowledge. Thank you. I swear to use it well. I believe you. Ultimately, my most pertinent question right now would be, what are techniques and best practices to teach actively anti-racism in primarily white choirs in primarily white communities? An issue in itself, but currently not in my circle of control. while my classroom culture is in my control and it needs to be intentional. You know, that it's again, a good question. And I find myself in these positions too, when we were doing performances and things, you know, going into the honor choir situation. I recall an honor choir that I did in Louisiana. And, you know, I'm very Black. And I say that not just by skin tone, but I'm Black. And I'm very gay. I definitely make it a part of my marquee. It's part of my brand that Mario is a Black queer man of color, married to Ryan, who lives with their dog Bowser in Cleveland Heights. You know,
yeah, did you know your Facebook profile says you're a husband twice?
Yeah, husband. Like, just are you sure you know that? Yes, he locked it down. He put a ring on it, and so, you know, gotta let those guys know. Not available. But it's a part of my identity that I'm passionate about, because one, I know that there's a little baby gay out there who is desperately waiting to see him or them or herself, or is it they or is they self out there represented. And if I happen to be the person that allows for that to happen, then cool. And so I say that specifically to this question to say, like, as much as you can, I feel in that Louisiana honor choir specifically, when I spoke from me, I said, this is what I'm saying. And use that as a way, as a bridge to say, like, I'm not trying to preach to you. I'm trying to say, this is what I see with my lens. And if you speak from your own personal experiences, or if you talk to people from the lens of, this is what I've learned through my research and then through my lived experience, then you may get some pushback, but at the end of the day, you're speaking from an authentic place, which is your authentic self. So when I've been in white spaces and I've had to talk about why I no longer do American Folk Rhapsody, which was one of my favorite tunes ever, I would just have all of my choirs do it. And I was screaming literally last night, just thinking about this panel and thinking about how I made my Black choirs do that song. I cannot believe I made 12-year-old kids sing Jump Down, Turn Around, Pick a Bale of Cotton. It's one of my greatest regrets. But I can use that as a way to let people know that, like, again, like Kelsey said, I'm human. I am going through my journey. And from my experience, this is what I know about racism. And this is what I have seen. And this is what I have felt. And this is what I know. I don't know everything. I'm not a historian, but I can talk about history. People get disarmed in that way. And, you know, just keep going, just keep working at it. It's ongoing work, and it's never ending. Don't get downtrodden. Keep fighting, I suppose.
Kelsey. And use the music to tell your story. Let's see. Oh, the big one. Here we go.
Oh, yes.
The appropriation versus appreciation. Mario, you want me to do this one and then you can take the next part?
Sure.
Okay. So with appreciation is when someone seeks to understand and learn about another culture in an effort to broaden their perspective, connect with others. So you put in the work to understand what you're doing. Appropriation, on the other hand, is just taking the aspect of culture that is not your own and using it for your own personal interest. So in the choir world, I say, here I am doing this really amazing Bollywood piece to show off how technically accurate and energetic my singers are. But did you tell them about the Bollywood history and the Indian culture and the Hindu language and the modality and all of those things? So when we're looking into music, we need to examine our own culture. We need to listen first, listen to the stories, gather the stories, consider the context in which we're using the piece, and then we share our own culture within that piece. Take it away, Mario. Mario?
Probably unmute. I don't know why I did that. Oh, my dog was barking. It's time for dinner for him. But this is a general guide. And again, understand everything comes with just, you have to be intentional about your thought process. So consider these steps to think about how and if you are culturally appropriating. Okay, so are you about to use a symbol or object or repertoire that is your culture? If yes, then do you know what that means? If no, you have some options. Because also there's this conversation about whether, like, if you were within the culture but you don't understand it, whether it's appropriation as well. And yes, it's about how you're using it. Am I using the object appropriately? Yes or no? Appropriate is a touchy word. I would add that I would add the caveat of, like, if we have WCPN, if NPR were to come and interview you about your rep list, would you be able to authentically talk to the core value of that music, of like what is embedded in that culture, but what is it saying? What was the composer's intention? You know, like, can you really speak in those terms, or can you just say, you know, dynamic piece that taught a lot about, you know, the Indian experience because we did Jai Ho, you know, just kind of that concept. If you've answered no to any of those questions, then you got to start from the beginning. And I come from a tradition in my choral practice in undergrad and graduate school of, like, actually really taking some time to look at your music and to really decide where it goes, where it belongs in your program, like in your rep for your concert, and where it belongs in the theme that you're trying to portray for your artistic experience. And I'm glad I had that, because it grounded me in being like, don't just do stuff that's frivolous, because you put yourself in danger at making silly mistakes like American Folk Rhapsody. So yes, cultural harmony is achieved through knowledge. This creates awareness and understanding, which leads to an appreciation rather than an appropriation of each other's culture. Versus the no, using symbols and objects of another culture without knowledge and understanding can lead to it being used in an appropriate way. The most common misuse of a culture, symbol, and object often leads to negative cultural stereotyping, i.e. just having all your Black students do the gospel songs.
So here are some questions we want to ask ourselves when we're picking our music. First of all, do not be afraid to pick BIPOC composers who create non-idiomatic music. If you were able to get on with us last month and heard Marquez Garrett's incredible presentation about this, you're going to have a great start. Victor Johnson from my middle school people, he writes beautifully. He's a Black man, and it's non-idiomatic music. Great. Ask yourself, why am I teaching this? What do I want my singers to learn from this piece? Is this authentic to its culture, or is it just a representation? There's usually some sure signs in your octavos that if it's authentic or representation. That goes to, what did the composer include in the music? Did they include cultural and historical information pertaining to the origins of the song and or the text? If you're going to add costuming and choreography, ask yourself these questions. Is it authentic? Is it relevant? Is it necessary? If you're concerned about language pronunciation, find an authentic speaker. We know it's 2020. The resources are out there, whether it's Instagram, a Facebook group, your parents, your kids, your language teachers in your building. You can find authentic ways to make sure you're pronouncing it right. Or if you're like me and you grew up in Gene Allen's diction class, you still have your IPA dictionaries.
No, please don't mention that one. I skipped a lot of diction. Sorry. It was at 8 a.m. and it was sophomore year was hard. Sorry.
So with all these questions, where do we go from here? These are just some ideas to start with. The list could be a laundry list, but here we go. For our undergraduate and graduate programs, partner with your college's Black Student Alliances and other mighty minority offices for your student as resources, groups, recruitment. We need more BIPOC educators in music education. And that comes down to recruitment, representation, and our students seeing that. I'm passionate about this, and I'm really going to start putting this in undergraduate ears. There needs to be a required course for music educators discussing the decolonization, anti-racist teaching, and modern practices in culturally responsive teaching. I unfortunately did not learn a lot about it as an undergraduate, and everything I've learned has been of my own accord since I've graduated. We need to make sure our educators are going out into these schools prepared to have these conversations and prepared to teach in an anti-racist pedagogy. For our music organizations, we need to reevaluate our standards for our performing ensembles, our honor choirs, and our clinicians. I would love to start seeing anti-racist practices presentations. I will volunteer this presentation if I need to, but I want to start seeing these at conventions, and effective and specific diversity statements and action plans that aren't just hearsay. In our schools, we need to start taking a hard look at our curriculum and programming. Are certain songs really necessary anymore in 2020? Let's reevaluate our dress and uniform standards to make sure we are creating a welcoming environment for all cultural and gender identities. Are your performing ensemble type names welcoming to BIPOC students as well as LGBTQ students? And then finances, is there equal access to fundraising and scholarship opportunities for fees, uniform fees, trips, etc.? Again, these are just surface things. There's so much more we can do. These are just links to some really helpful things. If you're looking to start some diversity training within your districts, I highly recommend Equal Literacy Institute and Paul Gorski. I just went through a 4-week training with them. A lot of the sources you saw today came from them. They're incredible, and they'll do great work for your district or your institutions. Like I mentioned, Marquez Garrett's database of non-idiomatic music and Black composers. The database I included today about the removal and advocacy of removal of culturally inappropriate songs. Decolonizing the Music Room is a great organization that's really working to making sure that music for all truly is music for all. And just another couple of resources, and we'll get this sent out and get this to Brandon. So let's go to the chat that I have not looked at.
Yes. I wanted to also mention, with one of the questions that were asked before, in your environments, whether it's your school district, your schools themselves, whatever organization you're in, if you're struggling with trying to get whatever it is to move forward with these conversations, find some buddies. I know sometimes it's hard, like where some of y'all teach. I have made it a practice of mine as a professional to teach in places that I can be safe, that my husband can be safe, that I can freely and openly celebrate the beauty that is our Black love. I have a space in my district that I feel comfortable there. And a lot of you are just where you are servicing and helping kids, and you might feel like you're alone on your anti-racist island. I guarantee there's some people out there in your space that you can partner with or you can talk with to get small conversations going. There is some history teacher out there who is begging for someone to talk about, why it's messed up that we teach history this way. Work to try to find some partnerships, and that will also help maybe ease some of the exhaustion from you trying to learn.
And be ready for pushback. It happens. It will continue to happen.
Dr. Hassler? Thank you, Dr. Hassler. Linda.
Okay, sorry. We love her. As the kids say, we stand, Linda Hassler. All right, anyways, be ready for that pushback. A lot of this pushback thrives on fear, and when people are fearful, they get defensive, and when they get defensive, they come off as angry. And so when you're in one of those conversations and it starts to get heated, it's okay. Take a breath, take a step back. Try not to focus on the individual and focus on the system, because the system is what we're trying to break down. Because once the system breaks down, then the individuals will fall into place, and then we'll live in this beautiful land of harmony. Questions? Oh, thanks, Dr. Matthias. We stand Dr. Matthias too. Our college mentors are here.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. I appreciate you, Paige.
Josh says, so could you tell us more about how you went about changing your middle school choir places to be more open and affirming to non-binary students?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it actually was pretty simple. I simply changed what was known as our traditional women's ensemble to treble choir, and what was traditionally known as our men's ensemble to tenor bass choir. So it's just very specifically non-binary, or I'm sorry, non-gender specific, just voice part specific. Then when I talk to my students, and this is something I'm still working on and I'm not always consistent on it, I try not to refer them as ladies or gentlemen or guys or girls. There's wonderful terms you can use to talk to your students. Lovelies, humans, music makers,
bugs.
Huh?
My kids are bugs. I just call them all bugs.
My boos, my home slices. Like, just so that they know. And I also have a huge pride flag in my classroom. Yes, angry parents came after me for my pride flag, and guess what? It is still hanging there, and it will continue to hang there. Because just my kids know it's a safe space. Also, I'm the GSA advisor, so it makes sense that I have pride flag in my classroom. Yeah, it's just been little things here and there that my students know that it's a safe space for them. It wasn't a big, we are now the treble choirs. It was like, this is what we are, and that's it.
I would just add, for Shaker, it's our guidance counselors who control the names of each of the classes, and it was literally just me already like creating a relationship with the guidance office for me to literally just be like one day, hey, it's the same curriculum, so we don't have to go to the board and ask for like approval, but just change the name to tenor bass soprano alto. And I also offered the caveat of, hey, this makes it a little bit more easier to program or to schedule kids, because they're always wanting, you know, the cram kids into whichever period possible. I never let them do that, but I just use that as my ploy to get them to be like, oh yeah, if we can let like all genders like join any choir, sure. That helped.
Yeah, a couple more questions. Yeah, Paige, thank you. I think something, you know, changing things, something that's still female sounding, yeah, that can be tricky. I think what I do with treble and tenor bass is I just talk about high and low, and it hasn't been too big of an issue. Emily asked, have I had kids switch? Yes. I had a student that was female to male, and he wanted to sing in the tenor bass choir. And the lovely thing about middle schoolers is their voices haven't changed much. And this was a very easy transition for us. He is still singing at the high school in our mixed ensemble, which is an SATB ensemble, and fits right in. As far as voice placement goes, we have boys, you know, male identifying students that sing alto, and we do a lot of voice, you know, mixing. You can sing alto this, you can sing tenor this, and it hasn't been an issue. And a lot of times if kids question it, that's a great teaching opportunity to talk about, you know, in one time females weren't allowed in choirs, and who sang the soprano part? The men did. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be about boy, girl.
Masculine and feminine. Please give me an opportunity to talk to a bunch of teenage boys about masculinity and how toxic it can be. Pretty please, just give me my soapbox.
Mario will now be available for clinicians, so email him.
Absolutely. Oh, actively do it. Shameless plug. My husband does this for a living. sageandmaven.com. If you're a person who needs an organization that does this work authentically, my husband and his organization does diversity and inclusion and anti-racism trainings for organizations in the way that is pro-Black, pro-queer, pro-brown, pro-women, and pro-justice. So let me know. And pay Black people also. Let people show your appreciation with compensation when you can. Just keep that in mind.
So guys, please feel free to unmute yourselves. I know we're over the time limit here. I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you for letting us be on our soapboxes, virtual soapboxes tonight. Like I said, we'll send out the presentation, both Mario and I's contact emails on the last slide. I also put my contact info and cell phone number in the chat there. I'm better at texting. It may take me a while because my toddler likes to steal my cell phone, but I will text you back. And thank you guys so much for being a part of this conversation and awakening yourself.
Really, and do have a great Thanksgiving, and please all stay safe. I know all of we are missing singing, so bless you all.
On behalf of OCDA, I would like for all of us to thank Kelsey and Mario for all of your insights tonight. I hope that this is just the beginning of this conversation that we can keep having amongst all of us in this profession and in OCDA. And Kelsey and Mario are great resources. I will make sure that I share the slideshow. Kelsey and I will take care of making sure we can get that to you. I can send it out to everybody that registered tomorrow. And I would like to go ahead and put in the chat box the link to just a very quick evaluation so that OCDA can plan future professional development offerings for you once 2021 starts, hopefully much better than 2020. So please take a minute or two to fill that out if you can. And I wish all of you a wonderful night. And yes, as Mario said, happy Thanksgiving and stay safe. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.